This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi guys, you're watching Common Sense Generation and my name is Kądzielska-Koper. With me is a columnist and author, Kacper Kita. Thank you very much for coming.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You are an expert in French politics and a very sharp columnist, but also an author of 3 books, which are?
My first book was 2 years ago around the French presidential election about Éric Zemmour and his national conservative vision and ideology, and also his I would say, as a phenomenon. And then a second about Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, and the route of her movement from the historical point of view up to the governance in Italy today, and my recently published book, all of them unfortunately in Polish, about the Le Pen family, from Jean-Marie Le Pen to Marine Le Pen and also Marion Maréchal, and the history of the Front National, the National Front, and the French right wing since the Second World War till today.
So you are a true expert in French politics. How did it start? After all, it's right now most of us, especially in Eastern Europe, tend to learn as a second language, of course, English, and then with this, because of it, we deep into the Anglosphere of it, and very often we give up the here Europe and interests of the local politics.
Yeah, it's true. Obviously, English is the first foreign language one learns today. But, well, I wanted to learn French also. My mom wanted me to learn French. And when I dived into it, and also when I first started learning French when I was little because of my mom. And then when I grew older, as a young adult, I went back to it and I rediscovered and dived deeper into the world of French history, French politics, French literature, which is all, I think, wonderful. And there's a reason why France for many years has been one of the leading nations, not only perhaps even more so in terms of culture, in terms of, for example, French as a language of diplomacy, and very vibrant culture that resonated around the world. But I generally strongly recommend for anyone to learn another language apart from English, because it gives you another perspective on different cultures, different history, and different viewpoints. Also, you understand better how different people, different nations, different societies perceive the world and all the intricate world of relations around different nations.
I think knowing a different language also opens your mind and this way of life of those people, which is in this usage of words, but in the pace how you speak, what you speak, and eventually how you think, because after all, our language shape our thoughts on a lot of scale. So
certainly,
you have this input into the French mind, let's say.
At least a little bit, little grasp.
Well, in French, everything sounds prettier, nicer, and more beautiful. So when we talk about multiculturalism utopia, which definitely we can observe through the French example, in one of the most, I would say, vivid example of it. What is it based on, and to which extent does it lead us today? What are the challenges?
Well, it's interesting that we started with the language question, because it's obvious that historically, civilizational universalism has been something very much present in Christianity, for example, and in Western thought. For example, people in centuries, for centuries, people used to learn Latin or Greek to understand better the classical works, and therefore understand better how to live a good life, how to make sense of one's time on earth. And I think that today also, as you said, by learning another language, you can understand better, but you can also a lot of things, but you can also go back to works of literature, history, of works of art, and perceive them in a deeper way. And even though today few people would learn all the classical languages, but at least some modern languages, it's always something. And in this universalism, we also have, I think, one of the roots of this utopian idea that we see today. This idea that you can just treat people as abstract objects, that you can just put a given number of people from one place, take them to another place, and it will just work wonderful. As the master said, wrote. I've seen many people. I've seen a Frenchman. I know from Montesquieu that there are Persians, but I've never seen a man as such. Every human being has an identity. Every human being has one's own culture, one's own languages, one's family experience, one's background, and this forms who we are. And this utopian idea that was very much, I think, vivid after. Well, it is still vivid today, but it became vivid after the Second World War, I think, as a reaction both to the Second World War and the tragedy of the Second World War, and also as a reaction to decolonization.
But a human being, as such, already was this ideal image of Rousseau. So it's a French Enlightenment, which is so much in love with universalism, with creating the ideal man, taking him, of course, in the state of nature as an angel, the best creature, and then just demolished and corrupted by this bad culture and civilization.
Exactly so. You're just right, because if we go back to Rousseau, you see that Rousseau proposes, and many leaders of the French Revolution were very much inspired by Rousseau, this idea that we should create a secular religion. And I think that multiculturalism is indeed a form of a secular religion. And Rousseau opposes his idea of a secular religion, which would go back in his idea to the ancient world. And he opposes it to Christianity. He believes that Christianity, because it places it believes that the afterlife is most important. It believes that people will be judged after the death for what they do here. That the basic attention, the basic identification, a human being that perceives one's life this way, would not be loyalty to the state, would not be loyalty to the society here, but loyalty to God, loyalty to church, loyalty to a set of moral obligations. And Rousseau believes that it is more just and it is more good for reducing human conflict, more efficient in reducing human conflict, if there are no competing gods, but universal gods, but every political entity, every state has its own gods. He argues that in ancient times, when you had pagan gods, you had Greek gods, Roman gods, Slavic gods, whatever. Everyone has had its own religion, and basically one's primary obligation was to the state. Every state has its own religion, which was which also formed the moral codes of the society. And he wanted to replicate that in the modern world. He believed that there should be a new civic religion that would and that Frenchmen would well, he wasn't French, he was Genevan, but people generally were, but it was later adopted by the French Revolution. People generally should feel obliged primarily to the state and have a secular religion.
And this is, of course, utopian because it tries to reshape human nature.
Of course.
It tries to takes everything what is very our core, because this urge for religion or belief, it's in every form of humanity. And it isn't as its origins are always something which is outside of politics, which is much bigger than politics, of course. And when he wanted to take it down to politics, then of course it opposes our instincts. It could work few years, but then eventually, as we all know, it led to dictatorship of a general, so I mean Napoleon. So we could see when you want to create this utopia and paradise on earth, and this is again something against the Christian view of life, because Christian view of life is the fact that we cannot create paradise here. We can have a good life here, we have good practices here, but they are all supposed to lead to paradise in an afterlife. But again, if we want to bring it here, then usually we bring hell, not paradise.
Exactly so. You know, Jacob Talmon wrote a wonderful book called The Roots of Totalitarian Democracy, where he argued why Rousseau was one of the main architects of totalitarian democracy, how Rousseau led later to Jacobin terror, but also, for example, to fascism. And you know, in these ideas, you have the roots for fascism, of communism, in the specific French example, it's interesting because on one hand we have this this idea of a specific republican secular religion. And then we have our point of depart, the Universalism, because French Republic is created as on one hand it is very nationalist in its perception of how one should fight the evil Ancien Régime and the evil Christian Universalism, but at the same time it is basically universalist in, for example, who can become a citizen. Anyone can become a citizen according to the Jacobin constitution from 1793. Basically, there were very, very low expectations. One should live for a year, have a job, etc. It's very, very easy. But at the same time, once one becomes a citizen, it creates a lot of obligations. And this is interesting how it evolves over the next 2 centuries, because basically later on we had a lot of political developments, upheavals in France. But then, after about 90 years after the first big great French Revolution, we had around 1879 a political turmoil when basically the anti-Christian left took over in government, and they gradually introduced the idea of having going back to this republican secular religion and basically removing Christianity from public sphere. So, for example, you had Marianne as opposed to, and her statues, her paintings, as opposed to the republican goddess, as opposed to Mary, Mother of Jesus. You had the new anthem, new state celebrations. Christianity was removed.
New calendar.
Christianity was removed from schools, for example, and at this end, Christian orders were banned. It's very important to remember that this wasn't a bottom-up phenomena. It was largely created by a group of politicians and intellectuals who created top-down revolution of erasing Christianity from the public sphere. public education, for example, and introducing compulsory republican education. But back then, this laïcité, basically this secular religion of laïcité, it was centered around no religion in public sphere. But after the Second World War, and with the process of decolonization, it evolved, and this universalist element of anyone can become a Frenchman was combined with the element of historical guilt, with the perception that them as basically white Frenchmen, they have this historical guilt towards all the people colonized, and at the same time that a truthful adaptation of the ideals of the French Revolution would be to actually allow anyone from the former colonies and then basically anyone from outside the world to come in, and gradually also there was a removal of this norm of assimilation, which was quite obvious historically when you had immigration or from Portugal, Poland, Italy, whatever, into France, but also when we had the first generations of immigrants from outside Europe, there was this pressure for assimilation, which was quite logical in terms of these Jacobin element of you have to become a loyal subject to the state. But at the same time, we have to remember that in the heritage of the French Revolution and in the heritage of Rousseau, you have this contradictory elements, this element of becoming a loyal citizen and total obligation to the state, but at the same time, this element of utopian universalism in the end as a goal to which the state and society should aspire.
It is also paradoxical when it comes to French culture, which is, after all, very elitarism, so elitarian, in this way that French is a difficult language to quickly learn. It requires a lot of practice very often, so it's not an easy way to approach. And the other thing is that French people hear very quickly that you're not born in France, and they create a form of ostracism, and they're very proud people. So those French culture, which tends to be so elegant but also very elitarian, and the other obligation, okay, now this goal that everyone can be a Frenchman, a little bit contradictional.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes you have this effect of removing the ladder. People who assimilate and then do not want more people to actually become the French as they perceive them that they have become. But yeah, generally this has always created tensions. This has always created tensions, and this has been a source of gradually more and more tension and political upheaval, and also societal frustration in France, because you had this abstract utopian idea that anyone can become a Frenchman, and basically it's not, there are no much demands. You can just come in, and you basically, because you also have the birthright citizenship in France. It's not as easy as in America, but basically if you are born in France and live in France, when you're 18 you get the citizenship, and then all of your children also get citizenship, which is also quite universalist. And this also there are few formal obstacles to become a Frenchman, and you have also this revolutionary Rousseauist idea that citizenship is the same thing as nationality. And but at the same time, as you rightly said, the actual French culture is actually quite demanding. It is actually quite hierarchical.
Exactly, it is, and they cherish all the French traditions. Very often, the French way of eating, the French way of clothing, the French way of just everyday life. And when you violate this, they don't seem to be very tolerant, much less than the Anglo-Saxon culture, where there are many, where the sphere gives you a little bit more freedom. But still, Europe for a very long time was absolutely in love in a French way of life and a French language, as you mentioned, the language of diplomacy, but for a long time was language of courts of many countries. And in England, you had this whole aristocracy talking in French. In Poland, you had the whole intelligentsia using French, as we had, of course, this extremely funny pictures from Adam Mickiewicz, where the women declare from aristocracy that they do speak Polish, but the literature and the poetry they can read only in French. But right now it's definitely over. So France is no more the imperium. I'm sorry to say this.
Yeah, it's true, unfortunately.
We all still love macarons and the onion soup, but by the time when it was actually this huge colony, I mean the imperium with colonies, it's over. But what is not over are the problems of those times. And as you mentioned, the problem of guilt, very similar with, and this is something which you cannot anyhow repay, especially in your lifetime, because it's not specific, it's hard to define, but it is somewhere there, especially imposed on people by intellectuals or by politicians. And then how are you supposed to face it or to make it equal, make it up to those people? By accepting everyone. And this leads to multiculturalism utopia.
Yes, Zemmour had a very nice phrase that multiculturalism is loving thy neighbor to the degree of hating oneself. And I think that this is one way to put it, because if you remove the actual concrete idea of this link between being French and participating in French culture and participating in the French nation, if you create this as an abstract entity, where at the same time you introduce this idea of guilt, this idea of colonial guilt, there's no way that this can work, because you have now children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people who actually participated in colonial times, and it's not like it's getting better; it's getting worse. And you also people who are living next one to another are growing more apart. For example, when you look at the level of religiosity, you see that in the 1960s, people, the French of European descent and the first generation immigrants from Muslim countries, they were basically the same way of religiosity. But then, during the next 50 years, people of European origin grew more secular, less religious, and at the same time, people of Muslim background grew more religious. There's the phenomena of desecularization in France, which is obviously a way of not assimilating, but affirmating one's own identity, or perhaps even the identity of your ancestors. And perhaps actually you can have people who care about their religious identity or their ethnic identity more than the actual parents, for example, who came to France to work. But the children then become more identitarian often, because of course you have a basic problem that immigration was supposed to be for low-level jobs, but obviously people who come from poorer countries to wealthier countries, they are more. It's easier for them. It's common sense, as is the name of your organization. That first generation immigrants, it's easy for them it's acceptable for them to do jobs for which they are paid more than in their own countries, but less than people in the new country they live in. But their children have higher aspirations, obviously, than their parents, and this creates tensions. and because obviously everyone wants to go up, no one wants to go down, and it's not easy to solve this quandary. One answer, but obviously a short-term one, is to import more immigrants from poorer countries, and then their children in a generation would obviously also want to aspire. And you can go on this way all your for eternity, but this creates more and more problems when you have more and more people without a serious attempt at assimilating them, without a serious attempt of having a common culture, without a serious attempt also at recognizing the basic obvious idea that people are not abstract objects. You cannot just move 5 million from one country to another and pretend that they are the same people as the people who are already there. You have serious religious, national, ethnic, cultural differences, civilization differences, and it's not and obviously people have less in common, find it more difficult to live one to another. You cannot have a society, a community that's more culturally diverse, that would work that would be more cohesive, more acceptable of one another than a community that is more culturally cohesive.
And then even more tensions grew,
of course.
And as we face right now in France, and I think this is the same problem, but addressed in a different way. That French people feel this sort of guilt or this social tensions, and they want to address this problem very often by becoming more secular, by even giving up more of their identity in order to embrace all of the differences and the multiculturalism. So giving up everything what their ancestors were for. But on the other hand, the answer of new generations of, for example, Muslim minorities is this disappointment of the way of life of their parents, because they still do those lower jobs. They're still not getting as much money, they're not respected and everything else. So they think, we don't want to follow it. This leads us to poverty. Cool. So let's become more radical. Let's go back to thoughts of our ancestors. For example, let's start the religious war.
Yeah, and it's important also to note that this phenomena of desecularization, this does not only concern people who are poor. The people who are poor, this concerns them the most. But even people from upper social classes who actually have some sort of material success or successful career, when you divide basically into 4 social strata for people in terms of earnings, where they live, etc. And you look at the descendants of Muslim background in France, even people who are the most successful, they also gradually become more religious, because when you have a large group with a strong potential identity, and it becomes natural for them to embrace this identity, because people are not aware of their identity if they live only among people who are the same as they are. If you would live in a society where there would be only women, you wouldn't notice that you're different.
Yeah, it's a contrast which shows our differences.
Yes.
And this contrast shows them their differences.
Of course.
And this creates all the tensions and the utopia of multiculturalism drowns in problems. It was Kacper Kita in Common Sense Generation. Thank you very much for being in our show and sharing all this with us. And for you, the viewers, we of course point out these problems. And I do think those are important for modern times in any place where you live, from any background you come from, because then you realize by contrast very often what is your identity. And thank you for watching our show, and I also thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation.